Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Bon matin. I'm Brittany Macnab. Starting our second lesson. Okay, lesson number 1. We'll do a quick review. Had to deal with Metis in Red River, the settlement of Red River. We talked about our Red River lots. Okay. We then talked about what the Metis wanted. So they wanted their language, they wanted their education, they wanted their Red River lots and representation in Parliament. Okay, the Canadian government said, nope. Then they created their own government, which was led by Louis Riel. They had the takeover of Fort Garry. No one was harmed in the takeover of Fort Garry. And the last thing I left you guys with is Riel is in Manitoba. Okay, he had his episode. He came up to Montreal. Then he returned to Montana, and he lived there. He married. He had a wife. He worked in a church, kind of teaching like a Sunday school type deal. And that's where I left you guys. Now, we're going to start the journey of 1885. So 15 years later. The Red River Resistance happened in 1869, 1870. And then we're going to fast forward that 15 years, and we are now in 1885. Now, before I start telling you guys some stories and some history about that, I want to express to you guys that in all of my studies that I've learned, this is the story that I believe. Okay? If you feel you have a different story, feel free to share. But this is my truth. Okay? I don't like telling the Métis side of the 1885 resistance without introducing you to a couple important people involved. So, with the Métis side of this, I will also share what I know about Chief Big Bear. Okay? This is Chief Big Bear. And we'll talk about the battle that his people had in the Frog Lake Massacre. The Frog Lake Massacre, its anniversary is actually tomorrow. So I'm glad I get to teach you guys a little bit about this. Along with Chief Big Bear, we have another First Nations chief, Chief Poundmaker. Okay, that's this guy. And I can show you other pictures. This is him. Okay, so I will tell you a little bit about the Battle of Cut Knife Hill, which involves Chief Poundmaker and his peoples. Now, the important thing to remember while doing this is that Poundmaker and Big Bear did not sign treaty when everyone else did. Okay? And I'll elaborate that later. A very important Métis guy to me is Gabriel Dumont. To our peoples, this is Gabriel Dumont. Okay? And just like how every other chief had their war chief or their the man in charge of the battles, he was kind of our guy. So we had Louis Riel was our diplomatic leader, which means he liked to talk and he liked to work things through. Gabriel Dumont was our hunter. Okay, having said that, amazing hunter. Okay, Gabriel Dumont was like leading buffalo hunts at the age of 13. There are stories of him like riding his horse as fast as he could and, shooting things off the top of people's heads. Okay? An amazing shot by Gabriel Dumont. And I have another picture of him. If your grandpa's Métis and he's got that hairline and it's starting to go back, you can just say, Papa, you look like Papa Gabe. Okay? Now, starting our journey for the Northwest Resistance, I would like to start on how the events kind of happened, okay? And so, Gabriel Dumont, this guy, okay? As Canada's expanding to the west, okay? So, Red River is in Manitoba. It's in this blue one, okay? It's right here. In this blue one, they're working west. And so, Canada, after the Red River Resistance, they kind of pushed the Métis people away from Red River. And so that's why we have families in Saskatchewan, and that's why we have, The Métis people are everywhere in the West. Okay? They're kind of pushed out of Red River. Now, they go to Saskatchewan, which is the Northwest Territories at the time, okay, because we're in 1885. And it's referred to as the Northwest Territories, okay? This was all the Northwest Territories at the time. And their leader over there is Gabriel Dumont, okay? Gabriel Dumont in 1885 would have been 48 years old, okay? So he is their leader. So, as Canada wants to expand into Saskatchewan, Gabriel Dumont says, we can't have this. I need to go get Riel and he'll come help us. You know, he knew what to ask for the first time. He knew what he was doing the first time. And so they went to Montana. I think it was Dumont and two other fellow went to Montana, and they said, Riel, you have to come home. Like, you have to come back. And so they went, got Riel, and Riel decided, you know, okay, I'll do it one more time, just because Canada knows my name, right? And so Riel came back, and they come up with a plan, and they said, you know, if we're going to hold off the Canadian Army or the Canadian peoples, we need to get ammunition, we need to get bullets and gunpowder, we need to get guns, we need to get all the food, because we can't starve while we're waiting here. And they needed material items, so blankets and all that kind of stuff, and they needed people to gather, right? And so the Métis people gathered, and they said, okay, we are in Batoche area, okay? And I think this is going to be backwards for you guys. I'm just going to flip this for a minute. Okay, this is the map that we will follow, okay? And so right now the Métis people are in the Batoche area, okay? And I will teach you guys about the Battle of Batoche last, because I want to show you what led up to that battle, okay? So we're in Batoche. We're in Batoche, we have our plan, and it is, we need to go to the fur trading posts to get the supplies. And so they make their way to Duck Lake. Now, Duck Lake and Batoche, very close, okay? So there was an army of about, I'm going to say an army, because you guys know what that term is. There was a group of men of 25 people, 25 Métis people, and they said, Kate, let's go down to Duck Lake, we'll go to the fur trading post, we'll take all the ammunition, we'll take the guns, we'll take all that kind of stuff. And that's what they did. Now, one of those people going was Gabriel Dumont. Now, Gabriel Dumont is a very good fighter. I feel like I should tell you guys that, okay? He likes fighting, and he's very good at fighting, and he has a very good shot, okay? So he went to Duck Lake to go take over the fur trade post, or to get the supplies that they needed. And while they were in there, the Canadian Army came, and they're called the Redcoats, okay? So just like the Canadian flag, how it's a big red maple leaf, they were the Redcoats. They were the Northwest Mounted Police, okay? So the Canadian Army came to the fur trading post, and they kind of knocked on the door, and they walked in and they said, hey, are you the people with Riel? Are you Riel's people? And Gabriel Dumont would have been, all right, guys, here we go. Here's where the fun starts. Okay? And so, knowing that they were on opposing teams, that they were supposed to be fighting each other at this point, they decided that they would have to fight. That's kind of what they had to do. And they didn't do so in the fur trading post. They had their own way of doing it, and it consisted of they had these parts, this horseshoe here, these are all trees. The fur trading post is kind of in over here. Fur trading post is here, okay? And so they decided that they had to fight, but Gabriel Dumont, before they would fight, they had to talk, okay? And they had to talk about the rules of the fight, and, who was gonna say who was gonna shoot first, or who was gonna do this, or I don't know what they talked about, okay? But Gabriel Dumont said, I can't go talk to them. Someone else needs to go talk to them. Now, that horseshoe I just showed you, that was kind of like the bluff, okay? Bad marker. That is where the bush was, okay? And the Métis people fought kind of in the bush, We hid behind trees, we did our thing here. And the Canadian Army came in with their wagons, okay? Their wagons and their people. And I'll just quickly draw that for you so you can kind of see it. We'll pretend that's a wagon. Okay? And they had nothing behind them. So they were kind of just open targets, I guess. So Gabriel Dumont sends his brother Isidore and a Sayoin, sorry about that, to talk about the Northwest, sorry, I just got a phone call and it distracted me, to talk to the Canadian Army to agree what they were going to do, okay? And as they went to go talk, they kind of met in the middle, okay? So here are my people, and they're talking in the middle. When they went to talk with the Canadian Army, no one was supposed to shoot, okay? That was the rule. When you were talking, no one was there to shoot. Now, having said that, as they were talking, someone shot Isidore Dumont, who was Gabriel Dumont's brother, okay? Now, seeing that, Gabriel Dumont got very, very mad, He hopped up on his horse, and all of the Canadian Army, or all of the Métis Army, just saw Isidore Dumont, go down in front of them. And so they're all kind of attacking the Canadian Army, right? And in doing so at the Battle of Duck Lake, many people from the Canadian Army died. They would have had, 16 people there. So when I say many, I'm not referring to hundreds. But they did have some people die, and nearing the end of the battle, Gabriel Dumont gets shot, and he falls off his horse, and his horse runs away, and the entire Métis Army thinks that Gabriel Dumont is dead, okay? Of the Northwest Territories and the Métis is, he died. And so everyone kind of starts freaking out, and the Canadian Army realizes what they've done. They turn around, they get in their wagons, and they bolt, okay? So the battle at Duck Lake is marked as a Métis win. Now, just when everything kind of gets settled, Gabriel Dumont sits up, and it turns out the Canadian Army had shot him, but it just skimmed the top of his head, okay? So people did see blood splat, but he didn't die, okay? He sat up, and I imagine he had a very bad headache, and then he would have said, well, did we win? How'd we do? Right? And during the Battle of Duck Lake, there's history of Gabriel Dumont sitting on a horse, and he's perched up, and he's holding a cross in his hand, and he's just sitting there praying, okay? And the journals that are kept are bullets were whizzing by Riel, but none of them hit him. You could see the bullets, fly by him or fly off the ground, but none of the bullets hit him. And so Riel is alive. Gabriel Dumont has a major headache, but he's alive. And Duck Lake is marked as a Métis win. I think at the Battle of Duck Lake, the Canadian Army kind of realized, oh, okay, we don't know what we're dealing with here. Okay? Yeah. After that, Riel made sure that everyone had the correct burial, including the Canadian Army. And the Canadian Army didn't go pick up their men, and so the Métis people gave the Canadian soldiers that had died the proper burial they needed, or they should have had. And the Duck Lake battle happened on March 26th. Okay? March 26th. The next battle that had happened is Frog Lake. Now, this is the story of Big Bear. Okay? Big Bear did not sign the treaty. Big Bear's warrior chief was Wandering Spirit. Okay? They called him Wandering Spirit. And they didn't sign treaty. They were in the Frog Lake area, and they were hungry. The people were starving, okay? And some teachers will tell you it's because, the First Nations and Métis people overhunted the buffalo, and that's why the buffalo didn't come back. I don't believe that, okay? I think the Canadian government or their military or however you want to word that, they made sure the buffalo didn't come back for the people, okay? They made sure to put the First Nations people in a situation so that they would kind of need to be dependent for the Canadian Army, okay? But you guys can do more research on that if you want. Okay, so Big Bear did not sign treaty. Big Bear wanted more, or he hoped for more, or he didn't see that as being enough for his people. Okay, so he did not sign. Having said that, if you had signed treaty, there was a person called the Indian agent. Okay, the Indian agent was in charge of having extra food for the people on the First Nation or on the reserve, so that if the buffalo didn't come, they were still fed. Okay. Big Bear and his people go to Frog Lake. They're in Frog Lake, and they're just outside of Frog Lake. And Big Bear says, our people are starving. We need to do something. And so Wandering Spirit says, I'll go into Frog Lake and I'll talk to Indian Agent Thomas Quinn, and I'll ask if, he's got some more food. And so Wandering Spirit says, okay, I'll kind of handle this one. And so he goes into Frog Lake, he goes to Thomas Quinn's house, who's the Indian agent, and he bangs on the door and he says, my people are starving, we want some food. And Thomas Quinn kind of says, this food is for my people. If you want your own food, go sign the treaty. And Wandering Spirit says, no, my people are just outside of Frog Lake. We need food. You're going to give me food, and I'm not going to ask again. Thomas Quinn says, well, you can kind of do whatever you want, but I can't give you this food. This food's not for you. And so Wandering Spirit says, give me the food or I'm going to have to shoot you and just take the food. And again, Thomas Quinn says, oh, well, you got to do what you got to do, but I'm not giving you this food. And so Frog Lake is called the Frog Lake Massacre because I believe it was 9 people died in Frog Lake, including Indian Agent Thomas Quinn. Now, Big Bear did not do this to support the Métis people in 1885, but after the Battle of Frog Lake, or the Frog Lake Massacre, Big Bear's people were seen as fighting with Luriel, as fighting against the Canadian government, and so I think it's important to tell their story too. Okay? And yeah, so that was Frog Lake. If you go to Frog Lake right now, Frog Lake, Alberta, they have a monument or a statue or something, to remember the names of the people who died there, why it happened, how it happened, that kind of thing. Okay, and that's the Frog Lake Battle. And that's anniversary is tomorrow, April 2nd, okay? April 2nd, 1885 is when the Battle of Frog Lake happened. Now, back to the Métis story, okay? We had the Battle of Duck Lake, then Big Bear's people had the Frog Lake Massacre, and then we returned to Turon's Coulee. Now, if you remember the map, Turon's Coulee is very close to Batoche, okay? Very, very close to Batoche. It's like a 10-minute drive now. And, that was just Métis men. There's 15 Métis men. They were going to the Coulee. And a coulee is like a little valley. Okay, we'll pretend it's a little valley. You can still go see this. I call this Turon's Coulee because that's how I was told, or that's how I learned the history. But now they call it Fish Creek, just so you guys know. Okay. Now, Turon's Coulee went something like this. Okay, on this side of the coulee, I'm hoping you guys can see this. On this side of the coulee, the Métis men had their horses, okay? I'm going to draw a little horse here. You guys get to see my fancy drawings. Okay? So they had their horses on that side. Now, the Canadian Army was on this side. Okay? So all the redcoats were on this side. Now the Métis people, the 15 Métis men, were in here. Now, of those people, one was Gabriel Dumont. Okay? And I think Christine Lepine's husband was in there. And there was a few others. Okay? And the Canadian Army was approaching, and the Métis people said, well, we can't jump on our horses and get away, so let's just go hide in this coulee, and maybe they won't notice us, or maybe they won't see us. Okay? The Canadian Army did, of course. And it was kind of a game, because all in here there were trees. Okay? There are trees everywhere in the coulee. And so the Métis people hid behind the trees. Now, the Canadian Army really had nothing to hide behind. So the Métis people, the 15 Métis men in the coulee, hiding behind the trees, would kind of shoot at the Canadian Army. Okay? Now, they had limited ammunition, so they didn't have too many bullets at this point. But whenever a Canadian soldier would look over, you know, a Métis person would shoot him, and then he would fall into the coulee, and he'd lay somewhere here. And eventually, like, the Canadian soldiers were just being picked off, or they were dying a lot faster than the Canadian Army should have been. And so their leader, McDougall was his name, okay, McDougall, said, you know, like, pass me a gun, I'll show you guys how to fight. And so McDougall grabs a gun, and he leans over, and Gabriel Dumont takes a shot. Now, we know the accuracy of Gabriel Dumont's shot. He's a really good shot, right? When he goes to shoot McDougall, the bullet goes through his hat. Now, some people will say, you know, he did it just to scare them away. Or some people say, you know, he was going for a headshot and he missed. Like, that's kind of where we're at. And you can believe whichever side you want. I think he was just going to scare him. Okay? And so the Canadian Army says, whoa, whoa, whoa. We need to slow down because these Métis people know what they're doing. They know how to shoot. And so the Canadian Army settled there for an extra week, training their boys how to shoot, training these men how to beat the Métis people. And when they set up camp here, the Métis people just left. They walked down the coulee and they returned to Batoche. Okay? And they would have said, like, you know, here's how close they are, here's what we need to prepare for, here's how many people there are. Okay? And there was about 200 Canadian soldiers. Okay? And so no one really wins that battle. Okay? The Métis people, none of them died. Okay? Their horses did die, because they were an easier target. A couple Canadian soldiers died, but that was the Battle of Fish Creek or Turon's Coulee. Okay? And they too have a monument up, and it's right beside Batoche. Okay? Instead of turning left, you turn right. That was April 24th. Okay? Now we're going to fast forward a bit to May 2nd. Okay? So a month from now. A month from now, we go to North Battleford with Poundmaker's people. Okay? Now, in North Battleford, they have the fort. Okay? This is Poundmaker. And Poundmaker's people were starving. And Poundmaker had a very, very large group of people when he went to North Battleford. Okay? His people were starving. And, you know, they looked like a wave walking to Battleford. And so the people in Battleford were kind of like, who's coming? You know, they're coming to get us next. Because in the newspapers, they had read, you know, the battle at Duck Lake and the battle at Fisher Creek and the battle at Frog Lake. And they said, you know, if that many people are coming towards Battleford, like, something is wrong. You know, something's going to happen. And so all of Battleford goes into a fort. Okay? And it's not like a blanket fort. It was like a emergency fort. Okay? So they go into Fort Battleford, which is a just giant wall. Okay? And their mayor, who's kind of in charge. This is a really bad fort. Sorry, guys. Okay, there's the fort. Now, Poundmaker, being the leader of his people, you know, Poundmaker, people, I don't think people hype Poundmaker up as much as they should, as much as they should. Poundmaker didn't have a war chief, you know, he was his chief and his war chief. There's stories of, like, Poundmaker putting a hide over his body and, like, bringing the buffalo to him. He's just a super deadly guy. If you guys have opportunity to read about him, do it. And I know you have opportunity because we're all in quarantine. Okay? So Poundmaker goes, he says, you know, we're not going to be aggressive. We're going to talk this through. All we need is some food. Okay? Give us some food and we'll be on our way. And so Poundmaker lays a blanket down in front of the doors. Okay? And he just sits there. And he says along the lines of, we're not here to hurt anyone. We are simply starving. We need your help. Okay? Now the mayor in Battleford's fort, or the person in charge in Battleford's fort, won't come out. He won't even talk to Poundmaker. Okay? And I believe they sit there for like 2 days of just like, you know, we just want to talk. We just need to get this settled. Like, we just want food. That's really all we're here for. If we just have some food, we'll be on our way. And Poundmaker is very, very respectful in doing all of this, okay? The Battleford's people won't come out. They won't talk. They won't do any of that. And they're all in there. And so some of Poundmaker's people go, and they just go into the houses. And they say, you know, we're just going to take some food for our people, and then we'll leave. Okay? When they do that, you know, on purpose or not, someone knocks over a lamp and the house catches fire. Now, so in Battleford, you have all of Battleford's people in this fort. You have houses on fire in Battleford. And you have Poundmaker's people who have gone into the houses to take some food because they were starving and no one was willing to deal with them. Okay? And so Poundmaker says, you know, you guys have just done something terrible. We need to get out of here. And so they head towards Cut Knife. Okay? And on my map, we do too. Okay? So you have Fort Battleford, and they're headed to Cut Knife. Now, at the Battle of Cut Knife, there's a hill. Okay? And this hill is important. Now, I'll draw it this way so we can have a bigger hill. Pretend this is our hill. Now, Poundmaker knew we need to protect our women and children. Okay? Regardless of what happens here, we need our women and children to be protected. And so he said, put them in the trees in the middle of the hill. Okay? And so we've got our trees in the middle of the hill. And that's where our women and children are. Because if everyone dies, we need the women and children to carry on, okay? And they're the people who can reproduce and have babies and, you know, continue on the names. And so all the women and children are here. Now, they put the horses and dogs at the bottom, and they put them around the hill, okay? And so you have your horses and you have your dogs, and they're surrounding the bottom of the hill. Now, if we were in a classroom, I'd say, well, why are the dogs and horses at the bottom? And it's simply because they can hear better than us, okay? So if they hear something ruffle in the bush, they'll look over and they'll start barking, or they'll start yinnying is what horses do, or neighing. And, you know, the attention goes to there, okay? And so that's the Poundmaker's people could see where the people were coming from, because their dogs and horses were acting up, or they were letting them know where it was. And they would have their horses, their dogs, and then they would have the people. They would have some soldiers here, okay, nearing the bottom, to kind of stay up all night and say like, hey, like, no one's here, no one's doing this. And so they knew the Canadians were coming. They knew they were going to be mad, and, you know, they needed some protection, right? So we had our women and children, our horses and dogs. We had some soldiers. And at the very top of the hill was Poundmaker, okay? At the very top of the hill was Poundmaker. Now, he did this so that he could do signals to the people to tell them where the people were coming from. Now, was the signal like, oh, he's scratching his eye, or, you know, he tapped his nose? No, they would have been massive symbols like, okay, like, they're coming from that way. You know, that's where the people are coming from. And so Poundmaker doing the signals up here let the people down here know, you know, where the people were coming from, and they would all go to that area. So we'll say that the Poundmaker is telling them the people are coming from this way. So most of the soldiers would go over here, okay? So when the Canadian Army came to fight them, it looked like they had a huge military, okay? They had tons of people willing to fight. And so they kind of came in and, you know, they fought each other a bit. And then the Canadian Army realizes how many people they have to fight. They turn around and they head back to Battleford. Now, this did not happen because Poundmaker wanted to join Louis Riel, but it happened, you know, 3 days before the Battle of Batoche. And so they were kind of involved in 1885 resistance, or they had a small story or a small truth on a side, okay, or B side, I guess. Now, that brings us to the Battle of Batoche, okay, and I think I'll save the Battle of Batoche for next time, because I can't do it in 10 minutes, okay, but I want to tell you that, guys, that during the Battle of Duck Lake, the newspaper articles did not speak highly of the Métis people. During the Battle of Frog Lake, Big Bear's people had to run after that because the Canadians were after them. After Turon's Coulee, everyone was kind of mad, okay? The Canadian Army was really, really mad, and they were, they were ready to fight in Batoche. They were ready to go after Louis Riel, his people, and kind of willing to do whatever they had to do to get there. The battle at Cut Knife Hill, or Poundmaker's battle, although I mark it as a Poundmaker win, the Canadian newspapers did not, okay? The newspaper clippings would have had pictures of the Canadian Army marching in, but in all reality, they got scared, turned around, and ran back to Battleford. Okay? Now, on Friday, I will tell you kind of the battle at Batoche, which is the main battle in the 1885 resistance. I'll tell you, Gabriel Dumont's plan for Batoche, because it was really deadly. And I'll tell you kind of what happened to Gabriel Dumont, and what happened to Louis Riel, and what happened to Poundmaker and Big Bear and Wandering Spirit. We'll learn what happened to these leaders after all of this, okay? After all of the battles, once everything was settled, okay? If you have questions, if you have comments, please feel free. I turn them off when I present because they're very distracting for me, but I will look at them after, and if there are questions that need to be answered, I will answer them in the comments, or I will answer them on Friday when I teach the ending of this. And with that, I say Kuapamatin. I'll see you later. Au revoir. Goodbye. And Kasagitin. I love you. So keep learning, keep reading, keep having fun. Thanks for visiting.